Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Smoke and Spirits. I apologize. I have taken a break from the channel. Life just gets in the way like that sometimes. And it's the holidays. We're getting pretty close to Christmas now. I know that I also said that I would talk about Kalila and the wonderful Scotch that comes out of that particular distillery. But it so happens that I finally got my cigar room up and running. I'm very excited about it. I've had a few cigars in this room so far, and I wanted to do that with you this evening as well. A friend of mine remarked to me that it's called Smoke and Spirits, but we really haven't done very much in the way of smoking. So Scott, if you're watching this, then this one is for you. So when it comes to what I'm going to be partaking in tonight, I'm going to finish off this bottle, the Dalmore single malt cigar malt, and as you can see, the bottle is quite nearly done, and that's because it is in fact an excellent Scotch. And what I'm going to pair it with is going to be something I've been looking forward to here as well. This is a Diplomaticos, and it's got a pretty nice ring gauge to it. This is what you might call a Toro. The ring gauge, I don't know exactly what the ring gauge is, but if we're talking about terminology when it comes to cigars, there's quite a few things to educate yourself on. But if you don't want to, that's okay. All you really need to know is a little bit of the lingo to be able to go to a cigar shop and tell the person there what you would prefer to smoke. As well, if you're ordering online and stuff like that, it helps to know a little bit about the terminology. So when I said ring gauge, what ring gauge actually refers to is the width, the diameter of the cigar itself. So something with a higher ring gauge will be definitely a thicker cigar. And ring gauge is expressed in 1/64th of an inch. So if somebody says it's got a ring gauge of 50, for example, it would mean that the ring gauge is 50/64ths of an inch. And as far as I know, I think 50 is pretty near the top end of the ring gauge scale. This one is not 50. As you can see, it's a pretty robust looking cigar, but it's not quite there yet. The other thing you want to know about is the length of the cigar, and for the most part those lengths are expressed in Spanish terms, and you'll go anywhere from a Corona way up into the longer end of things with the Piramides or the Salamones. This one here I believe is a Toro, and it's either a Toro or Robusto. I'm not quite certain, but it's really a function of how many inches long it is. And for most casual smokers, this is going to be the size and diameter that you're going to want to look for. Because let's face it, smoking a cigar takes time. If you really want to enjoy your cigar, it will take time, and you're going to want to pair it with something and really sit back and enjoy it. It's entirely up to you. I know, like I said earlier, it's getting a little bit colder out, so for the really die-hard cigar smokers, if you're making it a point to still, I guess, maintain your habit, as bad as that sounds, you're probably going to be leaning towards the Corona, the Petite Corona, which is anywhere between 4 to 4.5 to sometimes 5 inches. So not the longest smoke out there. But the one I'm looking at here, this will probably take about 45 minutes to an hour if I'm really sort of taking it easy. Now, the cigar I'm holding, you may notice, has a band on it, and the band is brightly colored. And I just want to take a moment to express my disappointment at the industry in general, because these colored bands are now going to become increasingly rare. The industry itself has switched to plainer packaging, and I guess based on what I've read and what I've heard, it's to discourage minors or individuals from smoking, much in the same way as you might find those pictures on the packs of cigarettes to discourage people from smoking those. That being said, I know that the intent for that is to keep minors from starting smoking or keeping smoking and stuff like that, but I can't imagine minors being interested in cigars in the first place, and certainly not premium cigars, this actually is a $40 cigar. So, you know, as disappointed as I am that the packaging has become more plain, the quality is still very much there. Diplomaticos is a highly respected brand from Cuba. And that brings me to my next point. So when you are smoking cigars, typically most people tend to think of Cuban cigars as being the best. And they're certainly very, very good, but they're by no means the only choice out there. I have other cigars in my humidor right now that come from Dominican Republic, others are Nicaraguan, and they're still very, very excellent cigars. If you are watching this and you're looking to get into this, or maybe you already are into this, you'll know a little bit about what I'm talking about. And the main takeaway point there is you don't have to break the bank to get yourself a very decent smoke that will pair with pretty much anything in your liquor cupboard. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the etiquette and stuff to remember about cigars. When it comes to etiquette, when I talk about Scotch, there's etiquette, there's do's and don'ts and things like that. But for the most part, it's really whatever makes you happy. When it comes to cigars, it's a little bit more rigid. And by that I mean, if you neglect certain points of cigar etiquette, then you may not be having as much fun with the cigar as you could be. So let's take it from the top. If you're going to a cigar shop and you're interested in cigars, the shopkeeper will probably let you into the humidor, and they'll stand there and they'll basically wait to answer any questions that you might have. So point number one, you're at the cigar shop. You have not yet purchased a cigar. You go in there and you pick it up and you do this, you know, and you smell it, okay? That's a big no-no. Never mind the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's kind of gross to rub your nose all over a cigar, especially if you're not going to buy it. You don't need to do that. Probably your best bet there is, if you don't really know what you're after, ask questions from the shopkeeper. Anyone worth their salt will know what you're looking for. And you can be as general and as vague as I guess as you want to be, and they should still be able to provide some useful advice. You might go in there saying, I want something a little bit spicier, a little bit heavier, you know? I want something that will last me 45 minutes to about an hour, and they will know what to recommend. Okay, so point number two, something to be aware of as well. Cigars, when they're kept in a humidor, it's a walk-in humidor, if the humidity is just a little bit too high, they will develop what's called bloom. And it looks like, honestly, it looks like little patches of white mold on the cigar. These will brush off very easily. They are not harmful to your health, and it's completely okay. It just means the cigar was a little bit too humid while it was in the humidor. So you can very well just brush that off. I mean, I say that because if you go in there and you think that this cigar is garbage or it's rotting, it's not actually true. It'll just look like faint white patches on the cigar itself. All right, now, third point I want to talk about is you've got your cigar here, you're getting ready to smoke it. Do you leave the band on? Do you take the band off? And this is more a matter of opinion. You can be a little bit more flexible with this one. Some people think it's ostentatious to leave the band on because if you're in the company of friends or other individuals, it's kind of a little way for you to flex a little bit and say, you know, look at me, I'm smoking this Diplomaticos. It is the Canadian edition. In fact, we'll talk about that in a moment. If you're anything like me, I actually, if the band comes off fairly easily, the way that this one does, it just sort of slips off, I prefer to just take it off because I don't know, it sounds weird, but I feel like there's some pressure there when you're smoking your cigar and you're getting close to the band, and I don't know, it's a weird thing. But the other thing is, if it doesn't slide off easily, then I would refrain from removing the band right away. What you risk doing is tearing the wrapper. The wrapper is the outer leaves of the cigar. So what you're better off doing is start smoking your cigar, and with the heat passing through it, it should loosen the glue on the band enough to eventually peel it off very gently, and then you won't have a problem with that. So I alluded to this a couple seconds ago. So this is not just a Diplomaticos from Cuba, but this is Exclusivo Canada. This is the Canadian edition. And as your journey into cigardom continues, you will undoubtedly come across cigars that are made for a certain market. They're made for a certain country, and these are called regional editions. This one is for Canada. I am in fact Canadian. Most of my viewers, I want to say all of my viewers are Canadian, but if you're not, then yes, I am in Canada. So for me, it was just an interesting little thing. I like Diplomaticos as a brand, and the Canadian edition is something I'm quite excited to try. What is the difference, you might ask? Well, ostensibly the maker, the cigar maker, has come up with a blend specific to that region, something that should appeal to that market specifically. And what criteria goes into that, I'm not really quite sure. But when a cigar is made, you've got the wrapper, which we've just talked about, and you've got the filler. So it's a combination of these things that go into the making of a cigar and the selection of which tobacco you're going to use when you make these regional editions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove the bands from my cigar very gently. And I'm just going to sort of completely contradict everything I just said, and I'm going to go ahead and peel that off. And my mission was a success. Perfect. So what I like to do when I'm getting ready to cut into the cigar is I like to moisten the end here. So the end that does not have an opening is called the head of the cigar, and the open end down here is called the foot. And it really just comes into play if you're sort of talking with other cigar aficionados, or sometimes you'll get a cigar that has a head band or a foot band, and that's really just a matter of aesthetics. It doesn't really mean one thing one way or the other. But what I like to do is I like to moisten it over here, because you're going to want to cut this, and sometimes if you're going to be smoking a cigar that's a little bit more on the dry side, you risk a little bit of cracking, a little bit of flaking when you go to cut into it. My cigars are usually kept at about 72% humidity. I've got just a little humidor there. I don't know if you can see it. It's pretty modest. I don't have hundreds of cigars. I usually only keep about 20 on hand, enough to sort of get me through, and then I'll do some shopping and then stock up some more. So I've sort of moistened that, and I've got this kind of cutter here, a guillotine cutter as it's called. So you may use a guillotine cutter, you may use a punch, like a punch cutter, which literally just looks like a sharpened little tiny circle, and you just punch right into the end of the cigar. It's really up to you what you want to use to cut your cigar. Just be aware that typically the punch will only come with a certain diameter. So it's only going to get so large. When you're talking about a cigar with a much larger ring gauge, and you've got a smaller hole at the end of it, that can pose some problems for you. For one, you might find the draw to be more difficult because you're trying to draw more air and more smoke through a tinier hole. So you've got this big honking cigar, and you're trying to draw all that air and smoke through a smaller hole, which will then result in a much hotter smoke, which can lead to some bitterness. So when people smoke cigars and they talk about bitterness or tongue bite, it's a very particular feeling you get on the tip of your tongue. It's not pleasant. And if your cigar smoking isn't pleasant, it's time for you to start troubleshooting what might be going wrong with your cigar smoking experience. So we've already established that with the larger ring gauges, you're going to want to use probably a guillotine cutter, and they shouldn't be really expensive. Mine only cost about 10 bucks, and it served me pretty well. When you're gonna cut, if you examine the cigar closely, you'll see lines around the cap. This is the cap here, it's the head, but really what I'm talking about is the cap, because when somebody makes a cigar, they finish rolling it, and then they take little bits of leaf and they paste it down over the head of the cigar. So if you look at it, you'll be able to see kind of a line where those little bits have been pasted on. Now listen carefully, because this is very important. You want to cut on this side of that line. Do not cut on this side of the line. Like I said, if you've paid money for this cigar, and this one cost me 40 bucks. I've got some in there that were about $12 or $13. Doesn't matter. You don't want to throw your money away, and you want to enjoy your cigar. If you cut on this side of the line, of the cap there, your cigar will start to fall apart. You won't get the enjoyment from your cigar. It won't smoke very well. It'll literally be falling apart in your hands. You're gonna get tobacco all over your lips. It'll just be revolting. And I mean, it is absolutely heartbreaking. Back before the pandemic hit, and I was out with gatherings of people, and we were smoking cigars and having some drinks, and individuals were just coming up and just hacking away at their cigars, and then just sort of going at it, and you could see the distaste on their face, but nobody wanted to say anything. And I certainly wasn't going to say anything, because I don't want to be that guy at the gathering who's, you know, going to tell somebody, actually you're smoking that wrong. I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but it's just, in my mind, it's just a terrible waste. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to line myself up carefully here, making sure that I'm only taking away enough to make it a decent smoke. So I've got a nice good cut there. I don't have any fraying or any of that stuff. And we're getting ready to get into this. So I got my lighter here, and I use a butane lighter, which in my opinion is the most expedient and the cleanest way to light your cigar. So, I mean, this one is by flathead, but any butane lighter will do the trick. And the reason you want to use butane over a more conventional lighter is because, believe it or not, the more conventional lighters do give off a bit of their own scent and a little bit of their own taste. It's that fuel that you're tasting. So, you know, if you want to be Mr. Tough Guy or Miss Tough Girl and light your cigar with a Zippo, have at it, but you're probably going to be mostly tasting the Zippo fluid. The butane lighter is the way to go. If you want to go with matches, most cigar shops will have these matches, and they're extra long in length to allow for the time it takes to actually light your cigar properly. Now, the third option is going to be, I guess if you're a believer in this, some people like to have the strips of cedar that come in the aluminum tubes of their cigar, or they'll take cedar from inside a brand new box of cigars, and they will light the cedar and then light their cigar with that lit piece of cedar. That's, I don't know, I've never, to be honest, I've never actually experimented with that, but it's not something that appeals to me greatly. I have my butane lighter and I'm quite happy with it. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm going to toast the foot. Why am I doing that? Well, let me tell you. I'm gonna just do that, and I'm gonna sort of let it sit there for a second or two. The reason people toast the foot of their cigar is because if you put the cigar in your mouth and you light it and you just begin to draw on it, there is a possibility that the heat and the air will be drawn into the center of the cigar. So you're gonna light the very center, but the outer edges will sort of lag behind. They won't burn at an even rate. And if there is one thing that will make or break your cigar smoking experience, it's going to be having a nice even burn on your cigar or not. And it's kind of a pain in the butt. And I mean, let's face it, sometimes you will get a cigar, despite all expectations, maybe it just doesn't burn very well. Maybe that one particular cigar was rolled poorly or something like that. It's happened to everybody, I'm sure. And that's truly disappointing, but if you can help it, you certainly don't want that to happen to you. Now, this evening, I wanted to pair my, my cigar with my Dalmore. So I've got my Scotch here, and I'm gonna pour myself a dram. And the reason I felt it necessary to mention what I'm doing just now is because when you're gonna pair the two, you've obviously made a choice about what you're gonna be drinking and what you're gonna be smoking. So when it comes down to getting started, which one are you gonna do first? And again, it's a matter of choice. I would probably recommend, if there's one of the two things, either cigar or the drink, that you've never tried before, then maybe start with that one first. Because when you pair these things, they will complement each other, but then you're not getting a true expression of what, for example, the Scotch is or what the cigar is. It's been paired with something and you're tasting both things at the same time. So I usually like to start with my Scotch and then I'll bring the cigar in after, but really it's entirely up to you. And when it comes to pairing, you can kind of go one of two ways. You can sort of say, you know, I've got a very heady Scotch. I'm sort of dabbling with the Islay single malts, so I might be tempted to go with a cigar that's equally powerful and heady. And if that's the case, you probably want to go with something on the higher end of the ring gauge sizes. I would recommend staying with the Robusto or the Toro, just because I like to pace my cigar with my drink. And if you have an extra long cigar, you may find yourself drinking more than you were expecting to. And last but not least, you may be wanting to take a look at something with a Maduro wrapper. So when it comes to cigars, there are different types of wrapper. We said the wrapper is the outside of it, and they're classified by color. So the Maduro wrapper is a personal favorite of mine, and it tends to be very dark and almost oily looking. And that's what they call a very spicy wrapper. So it's got a lot of taste and a lot of character to it. But you can certainly get other types of wrapper, Claro, Double Claro, Connecticut Shade. There's a bunch of different wrappers out there. It's not really my intent to talk about the entire anatomy of a cigar, but there's a lot of literature out there for anybody who is interested, for sure. All right, so I've got my Scotch, the Dalmore Cigar Malt. What I like about the Dalmore Cigar Malt, aside from the fact that they literally made a Scotch specifically to be paired with cigars, is that it's so well balanced with a strong cigar. You know, obviously because they made it to pair with cigars. But it's got a lot of really bright and fruity notes. There's a hint of smoke, but not nearly the amount of smoke or peat or iodine, brine, seaweed, those coastal flavors that you would find in an Islay single malt. This is very much almost like a dark fruit. There's a hint of brightness to it, maybe like a little zip of lemon in there. The finish isn't overly long. It does fade out with a little bit of bitterness, just a little bit of a kick there. Mouthfeel is very clean. It's not at all thick or oily, which further emphasizes that brightness that you get from this. So it's easy to see when you pair it with a cigar. Cigars in general tend to be pretty overwhelming. That Scotch like that would pair very well, would tend to cut through a lot of those really heavy cigar notes. I'm just about ready to get into this, so you'll excuse me for a moment. When you're lighting your cigar, rotate it through, make sure you get good, even coverage there. And when you're done with it, take a look and maybe blow on it a couple times just to allow it to really take hold. And then you're basically off to the races, okay? When you're getting into cigar smoking, a couple ways you can go about it. So the thing with cigars, and I can't stress this enough, cigars are not meant to be inhaled. If you inhale your cigar, you are a lunatic. It's not meant to be inhaled. Any sort of tobacco buzz that people get off cigars is inhaled, or rather, is absorbed through the buccal membranes in your mouth. And that's how you get that hit of tobacco. But really what the cigar is all about is the flavor, the notes, the aroma, and all that stuff, which you will get from holding the smoke in your mouth and then releasing it. Add to that the fact that the smoke is literally swirling around me right now. And this is the enjoyment that you get from a cigar. If you want to go a little bit further with this, I'm gonna throw a word at you. It's called retrohaling. And you can do your own research on this. It's called retrohaling, and it's what I would call the next level in cigar smoking. So what that is when somebody retrohales, and I'll just demonstrate for a second. You will see the smoke coming out of their nose. This is not like smoking a cigarette where you've taken the smoke into your lungs and you're exhaling it through your nose. The smoke never goes into your lungs. The best way I can think of, the best analogy is, I've done some scuba diving in the past, and if you're watching this and you've done scuba diving as well, it's what you would do to clear your mask. So you have air, water in your mask, and you're just blowing out through your nose. So you're taking the smoke into your mouth, but it doesn't go past that glottic opening, and then you're exhaling through your nose. I call it the next level in cigar smoking because you get way more taste and way more flavor by doing that. We know from our experiments with Scotch that the sense of taste and the sense of smell are very closely linked. So far, like I said, I'm definitely not disappointed in the Dalmore Cigar Malt. If you have the opportunity to pick that up, I definitely would. It's not cheap, but it's certainly not one of the most expensive Scotch whiskeys that I've ever purchased. I want to say it's probably around $120 or something like that. So far, I am not at all disappointed by this cigar. This is my first time having the Canadian regional edition of Diplomaticos. As I said, Diplomaticos is a very good brand. When it comes to you choosing what you're interested in, obviously you're going to search according to certain criteria, like the length and the ring gauge. The wrapper would be another really good one for you to look into. And then you're going to start looking into different brands and different countries that produce cigars. Like I said, you don't need to go Cuban to have a very good experience. A lot of the ones I like are Cuban. Partagas is one of my favorite. Diplomaticos is great as well. But I like a lot of other ones. I like the Don Tomas, which is not a very expensive smoke. We have My Father's Cigar, which is in the humidor as we speak. I have some that I'm actually excited to try based on recommendations from my local shopkeeper. So CAO, I've never actually tried, and PDR, which is a Dominican cigar, and I've never actually tried that one, but I trust the judgment of my shopkeeper who liberally samples his wares and is in a good position to advise me on what I might appreciate. All I need to do is tell him, listen, I'm looking for something that's this big or whatever, a little bit of spice to it, and he'll be able to advise me that way. As you smoke your cigar, I want to suggest to anybody who might be watching this to take your time with it. So there's kind of a fine line here. When you're smoking your cigar, if you let it sit for too long, it's gonna go out, and you don't want that. On the other hand, if you're sucking on this cigar too often, too hard, you will definitely get that heating up that I mentioned earlier. And the hotter the cigar gets, the more bitter, the more acidic it's going to be for you. So it won't be very enjoyable. And when you start to feel that or taste that, you should probably just take a break. Just let it sit for about a minute or so. In fact, I would say probably a minute between puffs would be advisable, 45 seconds to about a minute, because you certainly don't want to waste this. And when you're smoking your cigar, if you have some time and you have the presence of mind to devote to this, try to focus on how different the cigar tastes from the beginning of the cigar all the way down to the end. I say that because cigars are usually divided up roughly into thirds. So when you go onto forums or when you talk to people, you know, the real sort of cigar nuts might sort of talk about that. And they might say, yeah, you know, this stick, i.e. cigar, was very different from the first third to the middle third to the last third. That's because the cigar will evolve. And we talked about Scotch as well. So when you take your first sip, you'll pick up on things like mouthfeel, nosing notes. You'll pick up certain notes, but it will also evolve over time. The deeper you get into your glass, stuff that you pair it with, it is an evolutionary experience. Same thing as with your cigar. So I'm I confess I'm a little bit of an antisocial person, so I tend to do most of my drinking and my smoking on my own. So I have the ability to do that, and I can sit and take my time with it. But even if you're with other people, then maybe, you know, pay it some attention so that you can fully enjoy this and really pick up on all those things. Cigars also have notes, and they can be very complex and very deep. So some of the most common notes, so for this one I am picking up notes of burnt coffee. There's a little bit of leather here. Something that always seems to jump out at me are what I call vegetal notes, like green vegetal notes. And that's like, it's kind of a weird thing because as you sort of get into it, and for me it tends to come out in the middle third or the last third, and it'll be like mown grass or something like that. But coffee, chocolate, leather, these are very common notes for cigars. The good cigars are where you can sort of find all of those things in one stick. When your cigar is more two-dimensional, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the best smoke you could possibly be having for sure. And I definitely love how playful this Scotch is with this cigar. And I think it just occurred to me right now, and that's really how I'd classify this. This cigar malt is playful in the context of a good cigar. It sort of zips in and out of the heavier burnt coffee, dark chocolate, and leather notes that I'm getting from this cigar. It definitely balances it out with a little bit of those fruity, juicy notes. It maintains its elegance with the dark, dried fruit, like raisins, dried cherries, things like that. And then the cigar is just there to provide that really sort of heavy counterweight. Not at all disappointed, that's for sure. I don't know what else I can tell you about cigar smoking. A lot of this is going to be research that you'll conduct on your own. Just to recap some of the things here, please, when you go in to buy cigars, do not rub your nose all over it. Have a look at them, you know, maybe do your research before you even go in there so you'll have an idea of what to ask for. The shopkeeper will be able to give you some direction, hopefully. If you go into a place and the shopkeeper isn't able to give you any direction, either you know what you want and you're gonna go get it, or don't rely on that individual. I would probably buy my cigars from a place that specializes in cigars. There's a lot of reputable cigar shops out there. Certainly if you hit up the online forums, you'll probably find out which ones they are. But going into a shop dedicated to cigars is way different than going out to the corner store and buying cigars from there. For one, you know that the cigars have properly been maintained. They will have been maintained at a good degree of humidity, and the shopkeeper will have brought stuff in that cater to the market. He knows what cigar smokers want. I say he, but it could be she as well. I've met female cigar shop owners as well. So that's kind of what you get when you go into a real cigar shop. That being said, when you're storing your cigars, you want to store them at about 72% humidity. But if you buy a cigar and you think it might be a little bit dry, first of all, inspect the cigar. I said don't put your nose all over it, but you can inspect the cigar. If it's got cracks in it, then don't buy that cigar. However, if it is merely dry, by keeping it in a humidor and having the appropriate humidification process in place, you can bring a cigar back. It will take in the humidity slowly over time, and then you'll be good to go. If your humidor is too humid, it'll be hard to smoke that cigar. If it's too dry, then you won't get all the flavor notes that you could be getting. So it's up to you, depending on who you talk to, anywhere between 69% humidity to about 72 to 75. 75 is on the higher end of things. I just want to show you this thing. So a lot of humidors will come with a little spot here where you can put a little humidification sponge, and you put a special fluid in there that will help humidify your space. Personally, like I said, I like my cigars, and I consider myself to be an avid cigar smoker, but I'm not going to break the bank when it comes to humidifying my cigar. I usually just get these Boveda humidification packs, which you can get at any cigar shop. You can put them right on top. They can rest right on top of your cigars there, and they will maintain the humidity in your humidor. And you don't have to fiddle with, fluids or machines or things like that. It's pretty easy peasy, and one of those packs will be maybe $2 or something like that. So I think that's a good option for a lot of people that have a little humidor the way that I do and don't have hundreds and hundreds of cigars. Not that I'm knocking it, but if you have hundreds and hundreds of cigars, then yeah, absolutely, you're gonna wanna have a more high-end humidification system. But this definitely serves my purposes. Now, ashing your cigar. You don't want to be too violent with it. There are those people out there who will sort of tell you that it's more appropriate to just wait it out and wait for the cigar to drop its own ash. In my opinion, that just leads to all kinds of ridiculous looking acrobatics where you're smoking very gingerly to avoid the ash falling on you, because if or when it does, you've got ash all over you. And this isn't like cigarette ash. This is a big dump of cigar ash all over your clothes. And now you definitely look like a goofball because you've got this big ton of ash all over you. So when you're going to ash your cigar, like I said, I wouldn't recommend tapping on it very, very hard. But what I would recommend is, I'm just gonna bring the ashtray out here, is just sort of leaning this up against the side and rolling your cigar so that the ash just sort of falls off, and then just give it a very gentle tap to get rid of the rest of it. Now, what can be counterintuitive for some people is, I don't know if you can see it from there, but there's a little bit of an incline to how my cigar is burning. You want to keep the longer unburned part towards the bottom. I know it's counterintuitive because usually you would think that heat rises and you'd want the longer part on top, but believe it or not, it'll burn more evenly if you keep that on the bottom. I am getting some interesting notes. I'm sort of entering the second third of my cigar, and I am getting sort of the same notes that you might get from a blue cheese or a gorgonzola, believe it or not, which is kind of a weird thing to find in a cigar, but there it is. I will reiterate the same thing that I said about Scotch or spirits of any kind. Your experience with your whiskey or with your cigar is a very subjective one, which is kind of why I will sort of take a lot of reviews with a grain of salt. When people say, oh, this thing is crap, or this thing is garbage, or this thing is really, really good, and it's got all these notes, it's a good starting point for somebody to use as a point of reference, but it doesn't mean that if you don't detect those things, or if you detect different things, that you're way off base. Human beings are different. We come in all shapes and sizes. Our senses work differently as well. So it really is up to you. Are you enjoying it or are you not?